But can
I
you
think
take
you
some?
also mentioned south, right? You also have some.
They also mentioned south, that's right. The question was, the tsunami itself, does it generate sounds, infrasounds, for instance? Is it possible? I don't know.
Quick would have generated sound. But as I said, I must correct one impression. The Haicheng earthquake was not predicted on the basis of that.
Sorry?
The Haicheng earthquake in China
Yes.
was not predicted on the
Yes.
basis of that.
As a matter of fact, afterwards, it did seem to work in one earthquake, but it did not later on. So they actually more or less abandoned the.
No, the animal behavior was not used. It was the way the seismicity progressed in time, haltingly, that they used to predict it, and they were lucky.
And when this was about to come, the tsunami, these guys got into the boat and went away into the ocean, deep ocean, and saved themselves. Now, what is the communication between, even today, that means there is an element of a communication between man and the ocean. What is that, and how do you really get a feel of that something is going to come, and therefore it's good to get an escape? This was also quoted as one of the instances of these fishermen are not the regular fishermen. Apparently, they call themselves, people call them as gypsies in a way, but they went into the ocean and saved themselves.
In the discussions that have been taking place, excellent contributions have been made in several areas. But one area relating to the construction, the habitat, and so on, I have not seen anybody touching on them. When the National Building Code of India was finalized a few months ago, tsunami word had not been heard. We have chapters on disaster management, but it does not anywhere use the word tsunami. We have taken up whatever was known, cyclones or so on. Now a point I would like to ask, is there anything that anybody feels is related to taking into account for tsunami's sake, not for earthquake's sake, any aspect in the constructions in the coastal areas which are likely to be subject to tsunami disasters? So far, there is no indications that there is any such special force. I would like to know. The second point that has not come out, although in the seismic design a lot of work has been done and lots of quotes have been brought, there is one persistent difference in the approach and philosophy. In the American approach, the seismic force is considered in a magnitude which is, let us say, X. And the various analysis and the permissible increase in stresses are accordingly adjusted. In the Japanese system, the same X is taken sometimes as 2x or 3x, that means the magnitude of the force is exaggerated. And the discussions that I have had indicates that the Japanese approach has the merit that although ultimately both of them may result in substantially similar structures, the detailing in the Japanese structure is a much more desirable one, because it by enlarging, by magnifying the force, you are able to see the details and take care. Now, I only wanted to know, either from the point of view of this aspect of the philosophy, or from the point of view of specifically the forces that are created, is there any specific attention needed? And I would like, as a part of the proceedings of this consultation, that we are still open, as the chairman of the committee, I may tell you, open to bring out amendments. The final code is under print, but we have said we will be quite up to date by bringing out any amendments and improvements if needed. Or even if this chapter is still in the press, if it is possible, we can consider. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I respond?
Yes, please.
Actually, I am Sivathana Pillai from IGCAR Kalpakam. In the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board, a year before, it is brought out while fixing up the safe grade elevation of any safety related structure. We have to take, in addition to the natural events like cyclone and the flood related events, we have to take tsunami also into account. This is brought out in the earlier code itself. And for the east coast, the tsunami level considered is 2.5 is already specified. And this is this particular aspect we checked up in our nuclear power plant sites. And and this is found to be safe. This is also one of the things that is
Before the tsunami.
before this tsunami, already this in the Atomic Energy Regulatory Code, it is there. But we have to take into account while fixing up the safeguard elevation structure an element of 2.5 meter has to be taken into account over and above the mean sea level. That's one. And then regarding the detailing part of it, IS 13920, that detailing for the earthquake course, that we are, following up to take into account the seismic forces, and so the joints are designed as a ductile joints, and the detailing is being taken into account to some extent.
When that code was
More often disobeyed than obeyed.
this morning, when Professor C.N.R. Rao was telling that all things should be clear of this away from the coast and all that, one thing went, because this National Building Code has a chapter on all the building regulations also. Now our problem is, it is always, any code is a compromise between technological excellence and practical economics within the present society. And it is very difficult to say that you go away from the course. That means a lot of things are. So I am not sure of these. I only want from the learned experts here, if there is anything should be done to cover these. To the extent that are normal, these are covered. But what you told about the tsunami having already been taken into account, I must say that although the Atomic Energy Commission is represented on the National Building Code also, we didn't know that tsunami should be also a part, because it was not in our dictionary so far. Thank you.
I just wanted to make one brief comment, because you mentioned about loads and so on, and about distance from the water line. But another thing might be about doing something special in the lower levels if it's a taller building. Because what experience showed in the recent tsunami was that the lower floors were damaged, the grading, but nothing happened to the higher floors. So that would suggest that can be on stilts, exactly right. As they are already in all the areas prone to floods and cyclones and so on. So you wanted to say something?
Thanks, Dr. Narasimha. Let me just take a couple of minutes to introduce this website. I have distributed these flyers to you. This is a website called indiadisasters.org. We started a channel called Tsunami Response Watch. We are trying to report on the tsunami rehabilitation scenario and the challenges offered by the whole process of rehabilitation. So we report on the status of shelters, the status of livelihood, the status of disaster management. And probably one good way that I could request for your interaction and possible contributions towards better rehabilitation initiatives. I'll give you two quick examples where we did not have any.
I think we'll take it up in the next panel, because that is one of the major areas that I wanted to focus on.
Okay. Can during the panel discussion?
Yeah.
During the panel discussion.
I'll just give one example and finish. I don't have a speech to make.
Okay.
No, we want you to interact.
Okay. Just that if you have ideas about disaster proofing communities or disaster preparedness options, we would like to interact with you. Kindly send us an email.
Right,
the
good.
addresses are there. Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Yes, madam.
Since this particular disaster has affected the largest number of human beings among the many disasters, I think as we bring science and society together, the social sciences perhaps should be more represented in meetings such as this. And while we are undergoing I was really attracted to the meeting by this thing that it's going to be a review of what's happened in 6 months so that we can plan ahead for the present, those affected by the present disaster as well as for future disasters. So I think bringing the social science perspectives from as a scientific perspective, I think would be helpful, anthropological perspectives, ethnographic, etc. I mean, one question that I had is, when does a disaster end? I mean, and whose perspective, from whose perspective do we say that a disaster has come to an end? You know, maybe we'll discuss this in the next session.
Yeah, we have another session. Yes, we can discuss that. Yes. It's coming up in the last comment. I don't know.
Thank you, Professor Narasimha. One area I think has been left out, and mostly maybe because of paucity of time, is relating to the possibility of enhancing international cooperation. Like India being a big team, provided lots of aid to Sri Lanka, Indonesia, to a possible extent Thailand. So such in fact disasters provide ample opportunity for all these nations to be in fact to bring a closer cooperation. So that part was, I think, has been left out.
Thank you for pointing it out. Well, thank you all very much. Okay.
We were trying to address a different aspect, being from space and satellites. We're just trying to wonder whether we could do something to see in advance. And we collected a few experts and tried to see whether there are any precursor to the tsunami and precursor to the earthquake. 2-3 possibilities emerge. There are certain data. One is that there is some literature from Chinese, and that says that there is a rise in the temperature, local temperature, at least on the land, by about 3 to 4 degrees Celsius. And if we can have a very precise monitoring of the temperature of the whole area, of course very difficult, because when we are talking of a local temperature rising of 3 to 4 degrees, there can be various reasons, and you have to really discount rain, you have to discount excess sun and all that. But there are certain possibilities, and that's one area. The other thing which has been experimented, and there is a laboratory in Indore which has tried well, is if we can measure the very weak magnetic changes, geomagnetic field, the magnitude is small, and the frequencies of the order of 20 to 30 hertz. And they have seen that they are seeing these weak magnetic field variations as much as 8 to 10 hours before actually earthquake happening. There is still very weak correlation. A lot of study has to be done. That's another possibility. Of course, this does not need satellites, so I'm not very much excited because of that. But there's another thing which came up, and there's also in the literature, that in the let's say on the region above Earth, about 300 to 400 kilometers, there is a weak electrical field being created, and that is also happening something like 8 to 10 hours in advance. And if you can really measure that, and there's also very low frequency, there is a variability, there are distinct signatures, but all these studies are, I would say, slightly ahead of the animal behavior, because there's a lot more correlation needed. I just would like to say, because I've also heard a lot of things about this animal behavior. Someone said that my cows was abnormal. But the only thing is, just request to the scientific community is that we should be careful about it, because when cow, let's say, behaves differently, or the elephant behaves differently, we don't notice. And we actually, normally all these observations are post facto, and because it has happened, so we correlate. But many times the elephant must have done this, and we don't correlate. The ants also must be behaving the same way hundreds of times, but we don't correlate. So there are things we need very systematic correlation on this. But it looks like that there are possibilities of precursors, and particularly we were addressing this from the space platform point of view. There are possibilities we need to experiment. Thank you.
Incidentally, I must mention that one thing that I have heard from Dr. Vikas Sinha, whom many people here will know, of the Saha Institute of Nuclear Physics, is that emissions of helium go up. They're of course very small concentrations, but he says he has in fact been circulating notes that say that these concentrations go up measurably before earthquakes.
Helium where?
Over, in that area.
For example, near Bengal,
Yeah.
that area, near Bankura, they have some helium leak. See, in fact, there have been also such claims as the hot water for things come down. The level of groundwater increasing. There have been several such observations in a stray manner.
It's stray, that's right. So it's not yet. Dr. Shetty. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, recordings of surface temperature variations in that Sumatra region, recorded by IIT Roorkee. You can get in that. They have some observations.
Last comment.
I want to go back to this issue that was raised earlier, leaving a corridor undeveloped as a protection against disasters of this kind. What is true in case of tsunami is also true in case of a storm surge, which is very frequent along this coastline. One of the problems with the earlier code, which required 200 meters to be left along the coastline, was that there was no rationale for choosing that 200 meters. But maybe one could come up with a rationale and change it from that horizontal distance to an elevation up to which one should go, just because we have return periods of a particular kind, and that could be scientifically provided using appropriate measurements. This is in fact a big problem. Every year around April, many regions in Kerala experience this problem. Fishing villages are very often located very close to the coastline, and around March, April, when the winds change, become a little stronger, you find that during high tide days, when the water level is high, this water almost goes through these villages, and they are used to living with it. But this year they thought it was a tsunami. And it was just because it was fresh on their mind. But tsunami or no tsunami, I think we need to implement this kind of a corridor as a safety against coastal hazards.
Thank you. Okay. Last comment, really, absolutely. We have to close the discussion. Yes.
Can I respond to that question?
Yes.
Actually, for stations like for nuclear power stations and our power stations, the structures has to be, close to the, water source. So there is a, demand that as the structure is be as close to the water source as possible. So what we take normally is for the cyclonic surge as well as for tsunami, we keep the level of the, there is the operating platform at a high level. That is, we calculate the return period our structures are calculated for 1,000-year return period, and the structure operating platform is kept at a higher level instead of just living in a corridor and just going away, because it will be counterproductive for us actually. There will be head loss and the power consumption by taking this water away. It will be counterproductive for our side.
That's really the Sturridge idea. Yeah, that's correct. Okay, well, thank you all very much. I think there were many interesting comments and suggestions in the discussion. I'll now hand it over to Professor Ramachandran.
We have an interesting group of panelists, and since we are running short of time, I'm going to give the first panelist, Dr. Baldev Raj, who has to leave town in a half an hour. Dr. Baldev Raj.
Thank you very much, Professor Arkat Ramachandran, Professor Kasturi Rangan, Professor Rodam Narasimha, and my dear colleagues. I'm going to present to you more or less a case study as to how we managed Kalpakkam tsunami. And let me tell you right at the beginning, this was the most difficult assignment which Kalpakkam has ever faced in its existence of about 30 years. Technologically, it was not very difficult because the resources available at Kalpakkam in comparison to the disaster are many large, And being near to Chennai and being a DI family, we could draw upon large resources. The human tragedy, the suddenness of the human tragedy, the later on trauma, those were the major issues. Everything was a priority to somebody who has suffered, and how to make our priority and cope up with that. That was a very difficult thing, because to us there were certain priorities like getting back electricity, water, communications, but that was not the priority for most of the people. For most of the people who have suffered, the priority was altogether very different. So we had to really sort of develop a habit of listening a lot, which most of us didn't have, and then responding in a very sensitive way, in a realistic way, because we couldn't make any false promise. At that time, any false promise made would be leveraged very largely. Then we have the population of the villages around, and then very quickly we have to come to the grip of it that the villages are as much part of the DI family as theirs, because in the time of tragedy, let me be honest, in the normal circumstances, we don't have a equal relation. We try to do so much for villages as possible, but they don't lead the same quality of life as what we live. But in the time of this, we had to see that they get the priority because they had very little resources. So things like medicines, water sachets or medicine and all that, they had the first priority over us because we could manage it. And fortunately, we have two townships. One is a little interior and one is on the coast. So we could shift most of the people to the interior township, which is very safe and working normally. So it acted as an emergency camp, and we had a hospital, many people living there, so everybody came in and became a host to the families who had suffered. One point which was raised that when do you end the disaster? It was a very difficult question for us because the people were still suffering. We had to get back to our work, and already all the complexes were not having any people except for the reactors which were being managed round the clock and some of our plutonium facilities. At some stage we had to say that now the disaster has ended, but the sort of help and contributions and involvement would continue. It was also very important for us to have the involvement of all the sections of the people in us, school teachers, the ladies, various trade associations, hospital doctors and all that. They all had to become a part of a crisis management group. At the same time, crisis management group, if we keep on sitting in a room 40 people, it would set a very bad example. First 10 hours or so, we crisis management group of about 30 people, we sat in a room and from there we were dictating. Then we thought that that is not the right group. In the crisis management group, only 2 or 3 people should stay, and most of the people must take the assignment of taking some department and sort of heading that and trying to do that. And every evening there would be sort of some movement starting and people saying tsunami is coming again. Daytime they'd be working, and every evening they would start moving outside, irrespective of what is happening. And even if you want to stay in your home is perfectly all right. Still they would not allow you to stay because your well-wishers would say that you must move because tsunami is coming and all. But we had to carry on the relief operation. So in that case, if a very sound basis is available where the tsunami, somebody can say very authoritatively, then it would be very, very helpful. And at that stage, on 26th December and for 10 days or so, things are getting confused or not getting better and better. And so we had a lot of time. We organized something and then it gets dismantled. Again organize something and we lost some time in that. So let me quickly sort of mention as to how we went along. Kalpakkam is about 70 kilometers south. There are very important installations. You have 2 water reactors, nuclear water reactors. 500 megawatt reactor is being constructed. You have a huge center. You have plutonium facilities, waste management plants. And then you have a township which has 7 schools, 2 hospitals, and number of other activities which are around that. So it's a complex thing. First time when I saw the water coming into our home and then saw that the water is there and then it started receding, first thing which occurred to us is how are the nuclear installations. So I picked up a phone and talked to Dr. Anil Kakodkar and said that this is something happening. He was traveling in a train. After many years he had taken a few days leave and he was going with his wife, but I told him that this is something has happened. And then he said that first look at the nuclear installations because we don't know what is the impact of this, so rush to the nuclear installations and find out what is happening. After the water receded, my first response was that I should go to the hospital and try to see what is happening. And what I got was totally different to what I had imagined by seeing the water rising. Just when I entered the hospital, the corridor had already about 20 dead bodies. And that was just about a few minutes after that. And the doctors were helpless, and they were trying to move the people to the higher elevation, even those who are very sick. And our operation theater is on a small elevation, but not enough elevation to be there. And they were worried if next tsunami comes and even operation theater get washed, how it would be doing that. But without asking, most of the doctors and paramedical staff had reached the hospital. So after sort of leaving a few colleagues there, I moved on to the nuclear installations. And first thing which happened was that the MAPS 2 reactors, one was in working condition and second is on a shutdown for enhancing the life, for changing the coolant channels. The reactor had shut down because the submerged seawater pumps, they had seen the water elevation, and when they see the water elevation, automatically the reactor is shut down. So the reactor was in safe shutdown condition. But the control room people didn't know that it is because of tsunami or because of what something. They got a signal which should stop the reactor, they stopped the reactor. And then when they went out and they saw the water, whole water gushing in. So the map was safe. There was absolutely no concern, not even 1% concern that anything has happened. PFBR, which was in the construction stage, we had put about 2 layers of foundation, 2 pours of concrete for the foundation. In the pit, about 150 laborers were working. And it had all the embedments, it had various concrete in various ways, and it is a construction site. Fortunately, the supervisor of construction was at a height, and he had a whistle to organize the work or something. He saw the water coming from the east side, and he shouted, "Run away." He couldn't tell what is happening, and laborers also could not see that the water is entering. He just said, "Run away," and he gave whistle as an emergency siren. You won't believe it, that place it is very difficult to walk even, leave aside the run, because it has embedments, it is slippery floor, there are lots of things, and hardly you have a 1 minute or 1.5 minutes to save the life. How human beings work, human behavior is fantastic. That in 1.5 minutes, 150 laborers, not even one death in the pit, they all had escaped to some higher elevation, and they were saved. So that way we didn't have any casualties, there was no nuclear sort of a incident because of the tsunami. Though the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board mentions 2.5 meter above the high tide level, it's a notional figure given because tsunamis have been so infrequent, and this was a large tsunami. So this was again calibrated that 2.5 meter high above the high tide level is a good enough level to be maintained. May I have the next slide, please? This was how the PFBR site looked like before the tsunami came in. Next. And this is how it looked like. Sludge and water, 8 meters. 8 meters of sludge and water got filled in an area of 200 meter into 200 meter. And we are making the reactor. So one is that you have to take out the water and the sludge. Their embedments are already there. How to move anything? You can't move anything because the embedments are protruding. That was a big job. Then nowhere in the international literature we could find that if the seawater gets into the concrete at that time when it is not fully cured, what do you do with that? So we had to devise our own imaginative investigations. We had to do our work. We had to do the diffusion model, how the chlorine goes. Quickly we got the investigation, made a national team, and then approached the regulatory body. And then we could convince them that though this concrete is usable, but we have no reason to tell that it can be reusable as a foundation in the true sense. It is still the elastic modular, it is still the strength. Then we decided to put 2 barriers. We had again a national team review, went to Atomic Energy Regulatory Board again, and they said rather than 1 barrier, put 2 barriers. Though your diffusion models say that the chlorine is saturated, it is only on a few 100 millimeters, put 2 barriers and then you can start the foundation again. And then we were back into the business, and now we are almost on the line. We still complete the reactor project in 5.5 years as compared to 7 years which we have told the Planning Commission, and we could get out of that situation. So without death, without anything, without death was our luck, and technology part was that we could devise a technology to come out of that situation, though there is no international parallel. May I have the next slide, please? This is the maps. Here you find that the masonry compound wall which was made that broke down, completely almost broke down, and then the water came into the seawater pumps, which is used for the cooling of the condensers, and then we had whole lot of filling of the water. May I have the next slide, please. This is the jetty from where under the surface of the ocean we draw large amount of water, and in this jetty we had a damage. But there are always CISF Jawans who are moving all the 24 hours on this. They found the water receding, and they got scared that they had never seen water receding. So they climbed onto these lampposts, and there was no casualty. The CSF Jawan just shifted up the lamppost. That is why I was responding some time back that if in 30 seconds you have to do something, simply move up. There should be instruction as simple as that. Simply move up, whatever you can do. Have the next slide, please. This is how from the east side we had in the PFBR, the water, PFBR site, the water coming in, and whole thing was hazard. The lines which we had put together to take out the water or do the watering of the concrete, everything was in a mess. But you see the trees, very frail looking trees, they stand. Nothing happens to those frail, even after these 8 meters of water wall has come and gone. May I have the next slide, please. This is again a rubble and the mess which was created on the east side of our PFBR site. And the next slide, please. Township. As I mentioned that we set up the control room, I also told how we went about. And most important for us at that time was that whatever deaths have happened, we should not have a secondary epidemic. Because whole thing was full of kind of sludge and mud, and which we didn't know. What kind of material is this? We don't know as a material scientist. It was a combination of all sort of things. So our major priority was that do the sanitation and do the sort of a first medical supplies as much as possible. Telecommunications, we would have been in a very great difficulty, except that only Airtel worked. Nothing else worked. Airtel phones, fortunately a few of us had Airtel, and that was working, and we were in communication with the rest of the world. Otherwise, if we were not in the communication with the rest of the world, the medical help which we wanted from Chennai, the supplies which we wanted from Chennai, and all the communication which press was very eager to know about the nuclear reactors, what is happening and all that. So we would have created a lot of panic. So I think we have to give a lot of importance to a robust communication being available even in the emergencies.
What about electric utility?
Electricity went out immediately, but we were able to put it back our own because the technological resources in Kalpakkam were very large. So within 24 hours we were able to put back the electricity. Water we were able to put back within 72 hours and communication in 48 hours. So this was the kind of time frame. So whole township was more or less normal in about 3 days, and school started working after a week. But there was a big trauma. Somebody mentioned just that children were not afraid. Children wanted to go to school. They wanted to get away from the maroon faces of the parents who were too much worried for them to take it. But then the parents were worried. They didn't want to send their children to the school. And some of the teachers and principals themselves were afraid. It varied from one school to another. So we had to sort of sit with them and try to say that we'd inform you if something happened. And they had no faith, because 2 days after, false alarm had come. And every night they were seeing the trauma. So they had no faith in any of the vices. And then they were sort of saying that how we send it. But slowly, population of children, 20%, 40%, and then it grew and we had. May I have the next slide, please? Trees, yeah. When we walked around the township, human deaths had happened. There were 38 deaths, 4 of our employees, some of the people who are visiting the Kalpakkam campus being holiday, a nice place for vacations. And we had the deaths. But when you walk after 2-3 days in the whole township, hundreds of thousands of trees look dead. There are no leaves on that, nothing, and you found that you are going to live in a township. Hence, after where there will be no tree. We got in touch with MS Swaminathan Foundation. They quickly advised us that you sort of water these plants as much as possible. Let the salt which has come out. And they didn't guarantee, but we went on doing it, though we had number of priorities, but we didn't want to lose those trees. So we went on sort of putting water in those plants. And I can tell you that hardly 5 or 6 plants, trees would have died. Otherwise, most of the trees we have been able to recover. Plant site I have mentioned, and may I go to the next slide, please? later on, there was a sort of a feeling within the department that we are saying that it is very safe. Our map is safe and PFBR, once it is made, would be very safe. Are we right in such a national kind of a project to take a unilateral view and say that we are very safe and people need not worry? So we appointed a committee where we brought in all sorts of experts, very eminent experts from different organizations who can contribute, and they made very effective recommendations. And let me say we are going to continue this exercise. In August, we have a meeting of International Atomic Energy Agency, where the experts from 60 countries will travel to Kalpakkam, and we are going to again discuss with them that how to design for tsunami. Though 2.5 meter level has been talked about for tsunami, there is no design basis. And how do you design the reactors against the tsunamis? There is no guideline and all that. So we want to have the international expertise. Some of the Japanese friends, American friends, Koreans, they have some expertise and they have some view marks. So we are going to discuss once again in August. So, but as of now, the National Committee feels that there is no concern, and they have also suggested how to enhance the intrinsic safety of maps, like shift the pumps to a higher level. So you need not even shut down the reactor if they were at higher level, or keep all the valves and all that at certain high levels, so that even this tsunami plus 25% comes, still you are safe. So things like that they proposed. And also it was found that wherever there was a natural barrier, either a sand dune or a certain slip or something, there we had tremendous saving. I think it can be only explained that water, though it came, and the first few meters would have been very sort of turbulent, after that it takes a path of low resistance. Once it sort of stabilizes itself into some equilibrium, it wants to take a path of low resistance. And then that is why we see from one street to another, the damage was very different. One street you go in the township, you have a lot of damage. Neighboring street you go, there is no damage, or very little damage. So after a certain time, it followed a path of low resistance. And we could some sort of say that why it is happening, though not quantitatively. May I have the next slide, please. Now what we have decided is that we can't shift our hospitals, our schools and our township that very easily, even if we decide. So we are going to build a tsunami wall, tsunami resistant wall, which is again an outcome of the national debate. And this wall is going to be about 8 meters high, about 3 meters or so down, and about 5 meters above. And it is a good resistance to the tsunami kind of a thrust which can come. And also it has a toe which would resist the erosion when the water wall comes. We have already planted a large number of trees, and then we are going to increase it with the Tamil Nadu Forest Department and Swaminathan Foundation. Yes, let me touch this sort of a thing as a yoga therapy. It was very helpful. Trauma of the people was such that they need to be calmed. So how do you calm the people? And they have gone through a very difficult situation. It would not be possible for anybody else who has not gone through that situation to imagine and say nothing has happened, you go back and all that. It would be a terrible thing to say to that. So we had about 10-12 yoga teachers who sort of started meeting with the people who were interested in various places, sometimes with 5 people, 10 people, 20 people. And they sort of made a lot of difference. And we continue these yoga classes even today. And we call those teachers, and even the normal people who have not gone through the yoga thing, they just calm down. They don't have to do really yoga. It's a sort of giving them the confidence. So this is again something which is a very important part of thing. May I have the next slide, please? So this is how we are going to do. We are having a sea and a shore. We'd have various plantation of trees. In between we'd have a wall so that you have an effective barrier against the tsunami. May I have the next slide, please? Bridge we are going to reinforce. The water which comes during tsunami that can really spoil the water very much. So we have a water treatment plant enhancement. Emergency exits in school. That today Professor C.N. Rao mentioned that for the tiny tots you must have an emergency exit. You must train them. So that's very easy for them to just shift to an elevation. Otherwise they would be there. Wireless communication, we have given a lot of importance to the wireless communication, and I think that's it. And the communication is important because even till today we continue to have the meeting with all sections of the people because trauma has not completely gone. Maybe it would take 2 or 3 months more. May I have the next slide, please? This is what we have thought of. We have fortunately 2 control rooms, one of Madras Atomic Power Project, another of Hospital Test Reactor. So what we have decided is that we'd scan the US geological site, geotechnical site, European Mediterranean Sea site, and then our own geological sites which we have to differentiate between the weapons and the earthquakes, explosions, and do the scanning of these sites. If any time we find that the earthquake of magnitude more than 7.5 is originating in a certain angle, then we would give the warning irrespective of DST issues a warning or Home Ministry issues a warning or not. We'd issue a warning because fortunately we have the control rooms which are managed by very good people. And this warning system is a wireless system. It would be do there, and even you can do the wireless testing of a system periodically. So this is which we have installed and we have made it operational. We have the next slide, please. This is about the same wireless arrays which we have put sirens. May I have the next slide, please? That's about it.
Thank you. Only one question. You are putting big plants in Tuticorin. Is that area also tsunami affected?
That has also been examined by a national panel, and the foundation levels which they are providing, they are enough to. That has also been examined by the same panel.
But this 2.5 meters is an arbitrary one.
Now we have about 4.5 meter, this is arbitrary one. And we have now a much more, 2 meters much more than what AERB says. And after the meeting of IAEA, maybe we'd have to, and what is our difficulty is, for earthquakes we have a source term. So designer can design. For tsunami in a national panel, we couldn't decide on the source term. So we are having a difficulty with respect to that.
Thank you. Shortage of time, otherwise there are a lot of questions we can ask Dr. Baldevra. We are running short of time, but I think, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Some areas that have not been touched, reconstruction and rehabilitation, medium term, long term, creation of livelihoods, building material services, banks, etc. for construction. Role of the Panchayati Raj. Nobody has ever told them why have you not involved the panchayats. The National Disaster Management Plan says so. Center, state, district collector. But ultimately we have to go to the lowest level of village governments. And they are the people who can assess the damage, assess the loss of property, assess the loss of life, who should be benefited, who should be given aid. I hope the NGOs also react on this utilization of the panchayats. We created the Panchayat Raj in the 1974 Act, but we have never given them the resources or the power to plan the use of land, monitor the construction for its safety, and also help the people. I hope the next few panelists will discuss something on these matters. I now give the floor to Dr. Meenakshi Sundaram, who is a visiting professor here at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, has had considerable experience in administration, has been a fellow at the Institute of Development Studies at Oxford. I am going to restrict time to Dr. Meenakshi, 10 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and friends, I have been an administrator for 36 years. I had my own quotas of disaster to handle. In addition to that, I had the good fortune or perhaps the misfortune of leading a Government of India team to assess the damage and to prepare a rehabilitation plan for the Latur earthquake which happened in 1993. As a part of an NGO outfit, I had also visited the tsunami areas and participated in the rehabilitation plans. On the basis of all this experience, and also after hearing the previous presentations which covered most of the points I wanted to touch, I will restrict myself to exactly 7 slides in the next 10 minutes and hopefully complete my job. Now let's start with the first. In my view, the rehabilitation and reconstruction can be divided into short term and long term. The short term needs, you don't have the time to plan. Whether you like it or not, a disaster has occurred, you have to react immediately. The speed is the essence. You can't think of anything else. You can't read manuals, you can't listen to lectures, you have to act. Now in such a case, the first point is the temporary shelter, which I find in several cases we don't make use of the existing traditional spaces. Dr. Setter will certify, historically, the temples in this country have been used as places where you can provide shelter in events of disaster. Despite the communal problems or religious problems you may have, the best place even today for rehabilitation is a temple, maybe a church, maybe a mosque, maybe a school building. Whatever is available, we should make use of. Second, we have to deal with the available resources. The available resources again is extremely heavy from the second day to the seventh day. On the first day, the media informs about the tragedy, and all the people from all over the country or the world will appear on the second day. They want to work, as one of the speakers earlier said. The problems involved are coordination, how to make all these people work together, and there are politics of aid also, as one speaker said. For every good NGO, there are half a dozen NGOs who will come with the idea of disaster tourism. All these things you have heard. The problem will be to handle all this, make use of the local material, make use of the available people, have a coordination. Things will fail on the first day. You should not bother about that. Maybe from second day, how quickly you can respond, that is the essence. If some period is lost, there is no point in getting worried about it. The immediate problems are drinking water and sanitation. Even the chemical toilets somebody mentioned in the morning, how quickly you can provide this. And more important is the gender requirements. There was an article about Sri Lanka, how in the first few days there were quite a bit of problems because of non-approach to the gender needs of the women particularly. Then the preparation and distribution of food, someone mentioned about that, the long-term shelf life, how quickly you can get that kind of food and distribute. The most difficult thing according to me is the disposal of the dead. As I said, I had the misfortune of seeing 200 bodies piled up one on top of the other and getting burnt in Latur earthquake because there was no other way. There was no space. You can't give a decent burial and you can't keep the bodies rotting for several days. You have to take a decision on the spot. Sometimes, as an administrator, I feel that we should keep the media away from all these things. If you have a problem, get it done. There is no point in making a publicity and getting into subsequent problems, which also comes in the way of you are being an effective administrator dealing with the fiasco. Prevention of diseases. This again, as the previous speaker, the doctor mentioned very rightly, surveillance is more important than treating. If we could deal with our water problems and ecology problems, half the things are dealt with. Now, counseling is the most important area according to me. I was thinking that we need to counsel only the people, but after attending today's session, I think that we need to counsel the NGOs also. It is better we give some sort of a counseling to them as to how to deal with. A counseling is required for the media, but for the people, there are two kinds of advices one needs to give. One is how to handle the grief. That can be by the yoga therapy and things like that, which were mentioned earlier. The more difficult is how to handle money. I find the state government and central government competing with each other and sanctioning 1 lakh per dead and 50,000 per people who are affected. Suddenly there is a person who has lost 5 members of the family ending up with 10 lakhs of rupees. He doesn't know what to do with that. These sort of problems are reported from Andamans. It is better we give them an advice as to how to deal with the money. In my view, to handle short-term needs, the most important thing is the man on the spot. If the collector is good, competent, the state government should allow him to continue. If the collector is not competent, I won't advise transfer him because you can't transfer in first, second day, it creates further complications. Keep him there, but support him with a couple of competent men whom you can send from your headquarters. This is how you have to run the administration. Changing a person on that day doesn't send proper signals. That is one. The team and the person and media management, these are the immediate things on the short-term side. Now, very quickly, as someone asked the question, we need to declare the relief period as over and start the rehabilitation period. According to me, the moment we dispose of the last available dead body, the relief operation should be over. If not, we declare it as over and start a normal rehabilitation process from then onwards. Now I pass on to the rehabilitation needs. Next. I will divide them into 3-4 categories. One is the ecological rehabilitation. All these are medium term to long term. The short term thing is over. In the medium term, these are areas establishing bioshields, plantation of mangroves, shelter belts, stone walls, sand dunes, but it varies from area to area. I do not want to have a common prescription for everybody, so it depends on the needs of the area. Next. The other one is the agronomic rehabilitation. There was again a question about this in the morning. What are you doing with the soils? The soil has been greatly affected because of the salt water coming into that. We need to assess the soil capacity and evolve recovery processes for individual soils, and also identify and adopt plant varieties. In the case of Tamil Nadu, they identified 2 or 3 varieties of rice which can grow despite tsunami. Even if there is going to be saline water standing for a few days, the crop can still come up. The IARI at Pusa has done some research on this. About a month ago, they had distributed some material saying that what are the ways for improving the soil and also putting appropriate plant varieties. They also said that land use plans may have to be prepared for each individual village after the tsunami effect is over. Next. According to me, the more important is the livelihood rehabilitation. I take tsunami or any disaster as an opportunity to improve the livelihood of the person. Whatever has happened has happened. There is no point in crying over that. Can we make use of it and do something else? Now, if you take tsunami as an example, fisheries is one area which we can improve. As a college student, I had faced this. If I used to travel by bus from my village to the nearest town where there was a college. If we see a fisherwoman, we will all be scared, because she is going to bring a basket full of fish. She will get into this bus. If the driver applies the brake, either the fisherwoman or the fish or both will land on top of you. And it will create lot of smell. And when you go to the college, everybody will ask you the question, where are you coming from? Now imagine even today, after 30 years, the same thing continues. Can a fisherwoman take her fish and meet her livelihood in a proper fashion in this country, in any part? Why is that we are not dealing with that? Similarly, take the case of a fisherman. There was a statement that up to 500 meters or 200 meters, I am not sure, don't have any habitation. Very good. But why is that they are putting a habitation there? Because in the hot sun, after you take the fish, you can't run 500 meters and go to your house. You need a place which is very near. Therefore, even if you put a law that don't put a house, the fellow is going to put a house in 100 meters or 200 meters. How do you deal with this? You have a house at 500 meters, but have some sort of a resting shed somewhere in between. Let the fellow come, rest for some time, and maybe if he can run another 200 meters and go to his house, well enough. If there is a tsunami, he will cover all the 500 meters in one go. If there is no tsunami, which is going to be 99.9% of the days, let him move up to this 200 meters, relax, and then run the remaining distance. Now, we do not think in terms of providing a cost-effective management chain for fisheries. If you provide that, half the problem is solved, whether there is a disaster or no disaster. Then, education system. Do we need to continue with this kind of an education system for everybody? Now, it is known to everybody that children are also made use of. They are assisting their parents in their profession. There is nothing wrong in that. In which case, can we give them some kind of an education system? What are the things they need? A different curriculum, different syllabus, and get it recognized in the due process of law. There can be anything else, both preparing, all that we can think. And several government programs are already in existence. What we need to do is how many of them can be tailored to the current needs which are created because of tsunami. The two can be mixed. Next. Again, reconstruction also I want to look at as an opportunity for better livelihood. What we now do should be better than what they already had. As I mentioned, the construction of houses and resting sheds, which I explained, rainwater harvesting, solar energy, improved chulas, sanitary latrines, all this can be a part of the rehabilitation plan. I find now plenty of money is available at the field, and we need ideas to see that they are better utilized. Now, finally, the support systems. I would rather go back to the first point I made. locating public buildings. At least these buildings can be kept at an elevated place, 500 meters distance, and at a good elevation with a view to making use of them as shelters in the event of any disaster. I have travelled in the East Coast Road between Chennai and Pondicherry. You will find a large number of sheds there which are generally being misused because there is no owner for that. We built it at the time of some disaster, and once the cyclone is over, everybody forgot about it. Until the next cyclone comes, we are not going to use this building, and by the time the next cyclone comes, probably this building would have come down and you can't make use of it. Better thing, you construct something like a temple or a church or a school or a hospital, whatever you like, so that there will be somebody who is looking after that and which can be made use of at the time of a disaster. Next. Now, to do all this, there are two important things with that I want to conclude. One is information empowerment of the local people. I am not talking about government officers, I am talking about the people themselves. There are early warning systems about bioindicators. We have heard a lot of things. Maybe there are animals which can help you in doing that. There can be several systems Dr. Goyal also mentioned. So all that bioindicators can be harnessed. The science and technology, since morning we have been talking only about that. And providing access to this information. About information in this country, I have a major complaint, especially with the scientists. You give us for administrators a large amount of material. If I have to deal with a particular disaster, you will give me a manual with some 250 pages. Please tell me as a district collector, do you want me to go through this? Can you give me a 2 to 3 page material which perhaps I can go through in my car from my office to the disaster spot? If things are given and you can tell me, if you want more details, please see in chapter number 5. If that is my problem, I go to chapter number 5. If that is not my problem, I will forget about that chapter, go somewhere else. Now, can we not make this? But I understand the problems of the scientists also. You want to give an exhaustive summary. You are not willing to say that some point is left out. So you would like to give all the points. But all the points are not present in any.
Executive summary.
Yes. Exactly. That's what I was coming to. My point was, please give us an executive summary. If you give a 3 to 4 page summary saying that if you want more details, go somewhere to this. That's it. Now,
for a minister, you want only 1 page. For you, we can give 4 pages.
That's all. If you give beyond that, we will also not be using that. Now, similarly, the documenting natural calamities. The country has faced several natural calamities. Do we have a place where I can access and get the details? If I have something similar, now this is what we have to do. The man at the spot, the district collector or the secretary revenue or the rehabilitation secretary, should be able to access within a matter of few minutes. This is how we handled the previous disaster. These are the lessons we have learned. Let's avoid repeating those mistakes and let us copy whatever is good. That is very necessary. And finally, there is a statement by the MS Swaminathan Foundation that they had made use of their village resource centers for spreading this news in Pondicherry. There can be disputes over that, I am not getting into it, but the idea is good. There can be a place in a village panchayat where we can reach. People will also know if an information comes from here, there's a lot of credibility. Now my last slide. In my view, this is the most important. Whatever we are doing is for the people. It is not correct on anybody's part to think that we know all the problems of the people. None of us know all the problems of the people. It is better we deal with them, we talk to them. I would like planning and implementation, especially in the medium term and in the longer term, because in short term you don't have the time, I accept. But in the medium term and longer term, we have the time. We should be able to consult the people. In a democracy, both the scientist and the bureaucrat has a role to say what is correct. But he does not have the role to implement or decide. First, the decision will be taken by the elected people, or if you can get the people themselves, well and good. Once they say this is what we want, you can try all your pressure and make them agree to your point of view. If you succeed, well and good. If you don't succeed, whatever they say as what they want, that has to be implemented sincerely and faithfully. I would therefore like planning and implementation to be done by the women's groups, that will cover the women's portion, There are a large number of community-based organizations, NGOs, voluntary organizations, and the Gram Sabhas. That is where I come to Professor Ramchandran's point. We have a large amount of panchayats created with a lot of responsibilities, including disaster management as a part of this Schedule 11 of the Constitution. All that happily remains in the Constitution, and the panchayats are generally bypassed. It's all a show between the central government, state government, and the collector. Sometimes NGOs, they also would like to ignore the panchayats if they can. The panchayats will continue to make a noise and keep quiet. But Gram Sabha, even if you say that there is politics in panchayats, I am willing to accept that. There is a body called the Gram Sabha. At the village level, everybody who has the right to vote is a member of the Gram Sabha. There can be no politics in that. At least convene the Gram Sabhas in each village. We saw the case which the doctor showed, but there you had the community participation plus the captains of the islands is the word he used. I would only request to go one step further. In addition to the captains, get his team also. Let's have all the people present. The advantage in having large number of people is they will make noise. If 10 people make a noise, at least 3-4 might be very relevant. From there we can pick up ideas. I would very much like participatory action research with the support of the local communities and panchayats. That will be the best way for any rehabilitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just want to mention that on the 17th of December, 9 days prior to the tsunami, all village panchayats in Tamil Nadu conducted special Gram Sabhas to constitute village level disaster management committees. Did you know that? And this is, these local committees are best placed to implement disaster response and future disaster preparedness and mitigation methods. Just 9 days before what happened. And now, Dr. Goyal. Dr. Goyal.
And this is mentioned about
okay. Like this. And now then I can pass on to
array of hardware. There are satellites dedicated to ocean remote sensing, international and national, moored buoys, drifting instruments sampling the deep oceans, one large research ship, 2 or 3 more in the pipeline. The net result is there's a large increase in hardware, and it's an informed guess that the data available per year has increased 100-fold in the last 25 years. Data about the oceans. I want to touch upon scientists in oceanography, people. Again, informed guesses. I have not studied this subject. I have not collected any data, not done research on how many scientists are doing oceanography in India. This is informed guesses only. In the area of physical oceanography, including important subjects like coastal circulation, which Satish Shetty mentioned, relation of the oceans to climate, monsoon, storm surges, sound propagation in the sea. My guess is that in the last 5 years, the number of people who have published papers in international journals is about 30 in the whole country. That number might be 40, but it's not much larger than 30. Out of these, perhaps 10 have published in the area of ocean modeling, quantitative physical oceanography, numerical models of the ocean. And in this respect, the number of people who are working in a particular subject, I think tsunami monitoring, tsunami research, and cyclone storm surge research are completely different things. I thought that was a point which somebody needed to make. Just tsunami monitoring itself, with the help of hardware, with the help of reliable rapid communication, might not require too many trained scientists. But if you take tsunami research, tsunami simulation, numerical modeling, combining geophysics and physical oceanography, and if you take, for example, cyclone-related storm surge research and development, forecasting, quantitative prediction, these are very different things. The first might rely mainly on technology and communication, like I said. The second requires competent scientists in cyclone track and intensity prediction, storm surge simulation. The total effort in this last area, my guess is that the number of scientists required for R&D and operational work in cyclone and storm surge forecasting alone might be about 20. So that's a substantial fraction of the total number of physical oceanographers in this country who are working in any subject at all. And this is a matter of concern. I have no prescriptions, but we have seen a large growth in hardware, and we have seen not much growth or very slow growth in the number of well-trained scientists in several important areas in oceanography. It's going to be a matter of concern when we get into disaster prediction management, whatever, where you require scientific inputs of a high order. I'd like some debate on this, some thoughts on what we are doing about producing these people, about creating the jobs for people who are the one or two who are produced every year in the country, who are capable of doing quantitative physical oceanography. I'll stop here.
Your point is very well taken, Professor. There is only in the last 2 decades at least some attention is being given to the oceans, especially after the UN Conference on the Law of the Sea. Otherwise, even this initiative which has been taken by the government, and I have 3 or 4 research vessels, would not have started. I think Dr. Shetty will know that they had Gaveshni, and then I got Sagar research vessel. Yeah, because when got this ocean science and technology started later at the Department of Ocean Development, and even then there was a lot of opposition. Why do we need more than one research vessel? I think now we have 4 or 5 vessels, and I hope more oceanographers will be in. I think the Institute of Science, Bangalore, IIT Delhi, Kharagpur and IIT Madras are the only 4 institutions who are having some courses in ocean technology. And I now call Dr. Thelma Narayan. She is an epidemiologist and a public health policy activist.
Thank you, Professor Ramchandran. And I'd first like to express my gratitude to NIS, to the organizers for setting one whole day aside to discuss this very important topic at this point of time, reviewing the past 6 months. A lot has been said about public health already, and I think it's probably preferable not to just go over it again. Just 2 or 3 points to start with. I think we need to look at it from the human angle, from the angle of the rights of people who have been affected by tsunami, their basic human rights to a life with dignity, to rehabilitation as soon as possible. And one of the core principles in ensuring the rights of people is actually to involve them right from the beginning, as the previous speaker has just mentioned. Public health by definition means a strong role for the state. Because when there are huge requirements to improve health, whether it's provision of water supply, provision of sanitation facilities or food, the role of the state becomes or the government becomes it becomes dominant in a way. Now that was the old public health. Now there is the definition of a new public health which in the past couple of decades has gained precedence in many countries around the world. And in new public health there is a strong infusion of the social sciences. Otherwise, epidemiology is also a largely quantitative discipline. But social sciences add a different meaning to any experience. And the role of social sciences, I would like to reiterate once again. The principles of community health start with the community participation, as was said earlier. Involving people in situation analysis, involving them in problem solving through youth and women group, through farmers groups, fisher folks groups, recognizing that there are social disparities and inequalities that operate at every level, from the level of a family to the level of a community. I think that's one thing it's important for this group to recognize, the social inequalities that we deal with and how they influence all decision making and all action. We have been involved in the tsunami response right from the day after the tsunami till now. We've been initially working in Nagapattinam and now we're working in Chennai and Tiruvallur districts of Tamil Nadu. And I will give you some voices of the people very shortly. But this working with the communities, building their capacity, learning from the community, understanding their local cultural norms and the differences. We've had huge disputes and conflicts, some of which are hidden, some of which are obvious to those who are sensitive, between caste communities. The Dalit communities would not want to stay anywhere in a temporary shelter where there were fishing communities. Now, the fishing community is actually classified as the most backward caste. These terminologies are ghastly, but that's what the word is. And there is a huge fear element among Dalits. The molestation of women that takes place, the violence that takes place in these communities is enormous before, and even it gets accentuated after a disaster situation. Now, I thought it's good to listen to subaltern voices, the voices of the unheard. And since and they are experts in their own right because they have lived through 6 months of this experience. Now, I'm going to show you a little clipping from 2 camps they call interestingly Kargil Nagar in Chennai. It's just north of Chennai, and Kannagi Nagar, where there are about 3,300 families living. They have been rehabbed. They were earlier in Pattanambakam slum, very close to Marina Beach. And after the tsunami, they were on the pavements for some time, and then put into these 2 camps. You will see for yourself the living conditions just about a month ago. They've had some spell of rain last month, and this is soon after the rains. And just yesterday, we heard that there was a fire that took place in Kargil Nagar, where 644 houses were completely destroyed. So this group of people have faced a series of disasters, and you can imagine the sort of situation they are in. Please.
After nearly 2 months of living on the streets, finding no shelter to replace their tsunami-torn Marina Beach dwelling units, people of Srinivasapuram, Kasimedu are now facing yet another disaster, imminent epidemic. The situation requires urgent attention in view of the rainy season that begins in June. The non-fishing Dalit community who have been shifted from Srinivasapuram and sent to Kannagi Nagar near Thuraipakam in the outskirts of Chennai live in hot and humid light-roof temporary shelters recently torn apart and marooned by summer rain. As rainwater mixed with sewage from their dry latrines gets sloshed into their low-lying houses, children have to wade through knee-deep muddy water. In Kargil Nagar, a few kilometers down the road, where 2,142 families live, the situation is no better. Rains have played havoc, leaving the humid hot boxes in the midst of dirt and possible infection. Both are low-lying places with dump yards and open stagnant water bodies in the vicinity. Houseflies and mosquitoes add to the woes of the people in both the places. Their plight has been progressively deteriorating. From a hiatus on the streets, out in the open air, they are made to live in unhygienic conditions. Toilets are non-functional as only a few of the water tanks here are filled. The local authorities do not care to remove the garbage from here. Their workplaces and their children's schools are in the heart of the city, about 13 kilometers away, commuted daily by bus. Rains have proved that these places are just not conducive for living. Besides, there is the issue of tension with the local host communities here. These people are getting further marginalized. Both Kannagi Nagar and Kargil Nagar are outside Chennai district limits in Kanchipuram and Tiruvallur respectively. Kannagi Nagar and Kargil Nagar together have 2,700 residents. Basic facilities are missing, and the local administration often gives these clusters a second-class treatment. The government should be able to find a place within Chennai for temporary and permanent rehabilitation to make matters easy for them. Women do not go for work as they find it difficult to leave the children at home. In the crowded camp setup, adolescent girls are exposed to sexual abuse. There were incidents of gang leaders threatening people and misbehaving with women. Day-to-day living is rather tense here in these made-up urban slums, with families forcibly clustered together. We are not able to sleep inside the house. When we sleep outside, we are faced with the problem of mosquitoes and rain. Kindly request the government to shift us from here at the earliest. Along with children, we suffer a lot. There is not a single hospital this side to approach in case something happens to us suddenly. We cannot stay in this slushy place. We need a permanent housing board immediately. If we get it, we may not have to struggle for water, food and work. The supply of drinking water is not regular. Children often get fever. Medicines are not available. We are neither employed. We request the government to give us a house as early as possible. People say it would have been better if we had been swept away by tsunami rather than dying here. At midnight, we saw a snake lying over the bedsheet of a person sleeping, and we killed it. This side, another snake was found while we were cooking. From the lake side, the snakes keep creeping one by one. We don't sleep at nights. They lie hidden even within the house. Whether they come to bite us or come in search of food, we do not know. We suffer a lot with children around. It's difficult to walk in the slushy area. Many children develop sores in their feet and are admitted in hospitals with fever. Ever since I came to this place, I have not been feeling well due to mosquitoes and water problem. I am unable to move around. Rainwater pours inside the house. I have no source of income and nobody to take care of me. There are no toilet and bathing facilities. We see snakes everywhere. We suffer a lot with our children in the heat and in the rain. When the wind blows, the roofs get lifted. We have been brought to a place where there is no facility at all. We don't have transport facility. We have to spend 20 rupees for each trip. We get rupees 1,000 per month, but the expenditure comes to double. We don't have food. We have lost our carts. Literally, we die here. With no toilet facility, we keep running here and there. Children too find it difficult to go outside as the stagnant water is knee-deep.
This was just to give you a first-hand feel of the situation. Resource group in public health and community health, and when we were wanting to first go to work in the area, the health secretary told us that there was no need to work in Chennai. Why don't you go to Nagapattinam? We had already been to Nagapattinam, in fact. And I was wondering why this statement was made, because we had also visited these areas and saw the need. Therefore, we made this film actually to convince the administration of the situation about this. And though Nagapattinam and other districts like Kadalur and even Nagarkoil have district coordination committees that are working quite effectively, very efficiently, and on the whole we have to say that the response of the administration was superb at the initial period. But now in Chennai, for some reason, there was there was not this coordination. So it's only in April, end of April and May, when the rain started, that this through pressure from the NGOs, a coordination council was formed, and now they're talking about relocation. When we're talking of building codes, which is really a very critical issue, I think we should consider the codes for temporary shelters. In Latur, people were in temporary shelters for 2 years. And the material used for temporary shelters, which you saw here, is made out of recycled paper and tar. And we were told that this was fireproof. And just yesterday we heard that there was a big fire. The roofs are all connected, in fact. It's the same roof and little partitions. And you saw all the holes in the buildings. With the rains coming now around the corner, I don't know what their living conditions are going to be. In public health, the most important issue is basic determinants of health, which is just basic common sense, shelter, water, food, sanitation are the basics. Now, shelter is in this sort of condition in the capital city. And we would like to raise this as an issue of denial of human rights, denial of access to care, as well as issue of, a humanitarian issue. I think with this time is probably up, so we can leave it. The politics of aid is very important.
It is an example of politics of aid.
Yeah.
Thank you. I now request more minutes.
Yeah, I think we should give a due.
Please, those who want to ask any questions from the panel. I think they're all tired of.
There is one.
Yes,
I'll quickly go through a few comments and questions. Number one, peer project, which all throughout the last few courses we've done at the NIS as well, we've never really been, I've never heard this terminology being used, but the SPHERE project is the standard of care by humanitarian assistance in disasters. And I guess it covers all of us, medical, health, shelter, everything. Second thing is the temporary shelters which actually existed in Nicobars, for example. The only ones really standing up, was mentioned earlier, was supposed to be temples, etc. But actually it was the veterinary hospitals and the dispensaries. The human hospitals, of course, were down, but the veterinary hospitals are the only standing things. The role of the services in every disaster I've been into in the last 5 disasters, I have always seen the role of the services, the military and the paramilitary. They hate that role. They keep arguing against that role because my father's an ex-serviceman. They argue against the role. However, they seem to be the only force capable of rescue and evacuation and transportation and initiation of a process. With all due respect to the IAS, I don't think they have at command ability and resources to do what the services do in the initial phases. Counseling, yoga therapy is a nice thought. However, the NIMHANS has already got a standard of care in grief counseling post-disaster, and they always go into the area, last 3 disasters, they go into the area following the initial aspects. Another factor is the absence of identities and proof of identities post-disaster. I owned that house, I had 3 children, I don't know my name, I don't have proof of my ID. Becomes a big issue for in a rehabilitation phase. And I've learned a lot from this whole day, but I'm just wondering, the next time we should have rehabilitation first and then end up with all our good medical assistance and all that, because I think the rehabilitation, we treat exactly rehabilitation in a one-day workshop the same way we treat rehabilitation in general, as what we've seen in the field. Thank you.
There have been several workshops on this particular area.
Just an input for correction of impressions would be necessary. While unstintingly acknowledging and appreciating the role of the defense forces, as administrative people, we have seen internal competition, profile building, problems, and lack of coordination within the defense forces as well as between the defense as well as the administration. These are all some of the internal failures. In the broader canvas of what we should be doing, these are far less important than than individual impressions which we may gain about that. Even with regard to the so-called Operation Madad, which was very well highlighted in the press, I mentioned that after 9 days, it had been quietly wound up for reasons of endurance having been completed, and fresh aircrafts and helicopters could not come, and even in a specific island, the brigadier gave a letter to the deputy commissioner telling that the Operation Madad is withdrawn. When the matter is discussed with the Lieutenant General, who is the Vice Chairman and the spokesperson of the Integrated Relief Command, he said, no, it has not been withdrawn. Now, these are all certain internal matters which get thrashed out during the course of the working, provided there is commitment and otherwise good intentions. I must place it on record that for about 2 to 3 weeks, as far as Andaman and Nicobar is concerned, everybody worked with a tremendous amount of devotion and commitment. There was very little which could be done by the government. So much was done by each and every participating department and agencies and individuals. It is something unbelievable. Some sort of misunderstandings or other issues might have come up at a later level, when
I think I'm going to stop at this point.
No, sir, I think I misunderstood. I wasn't mentioning that. I didn't know about this aspect. I was just trying to say that maybe a service presentation would have been interesting. I was meant that way. Yeah. I fully acknowledge the role of everybody, and I've always used everybody. I've always gone to the government. So I'm sorry, Mr. Bhatt, if you thought I was implying something else.
I don't think either you implied or he misunderstood. The major point is, even those we in this country did not want any assistance from abroad. Many of them were surprised at the attitude of our government. But the very same people have come and said that we have done a wonderful job as far as relief and rehabilitation is concerned in respect of the tsunami. Even the other day, President Bill Clinton was there speaking about it. Compared to what has happened elsewhere, I think ultimately depends upon the leader of the individual who is in charge. It doesn't matter whether he is from administrative service or from the army or from any other NGO, etc. I think we have learned a lot of lessons in the last 3 or 4 disasters, and I think that people have come together. That is why we had such a tremendous outpouring of help when the tsunami hit our country last year. We have learned lessons, and I think we can progress from that in the coming years so that we are better prepared to meet disasters. I'm afraid we are not going to run away from disasters. When I think some of the big, huge chemical plants coming up, we always talk of the Bhopal disaster that was 20 years ago. I don't know how many more are likely to happen, because when I see trucks carrying toxic materials which are not allowed in any other country in the world, and if there is an accident, you can have a major disaster. With these few words, I will turn to Dr. Kasturirangan for his final remarks.
I don't want to make the final remarks. I think I should leave that to Professor Narasimha. The only thing that I would like to mention is I really enjoyed the full set of deliberation. We started with some objectives today, with the idea that we will bring in the newer dimensions which has not been addressed in the type of meetings that we had nationally in the earlier occasions. And the whole idea is to bring in more than just the science and technology and a little bit of what we should be doing in terms of measurements and setting up a system, because that doesn't tell the whole story. So that's where we thought that we should bring this kind of a set of people together, share the experiences, and in the process also try to see what we should be doing for the future, not in the restricted sense, but in a holistic fashion. I think by and large that kind of a thing has been fulfilled, and holding it after the 6 months of the tsunami has another advantage. if you try to say something within the next first 15 days of the event or 20 month of the event, you would like to say, you will say only what you should be saying in the public. You will not say everything that you would like to say, but you don't want to. And this was very much evident. You see how many of the perceptions that we had about what had happened in the press about a minister making some declaration, another minister saying that that is not so, and the type of understanding we had of the whole set of events. But when Professor Ramamurthy presented the whole sequence of this and said how, and very clearly brought out the rationale for everything that has happened, and this could have happened only 6 months later. It could not have happened in the very first month of what had happened. And this is a more sober assessment, a more practical and a realistic appraisal of what went on. I think we feel much more comfortable that things were not what we were given to understand. The other part of it is, of course, some of the very specific things which I don't want to repeat this, but I can only say that Professor Gaur's assurance that we won't have a tsunami for the next 100 years, and the fact that we should be mapping the coastal regions at 1, 2 and a few meters to look at the water incursions level, I think it's a very important thing. I don't know whether there is an action nationally with respect to doing this, particularly to look at the vulnerable zones with respect to the water incursion. But I think that could be a very important thing, and this coupled with what Professor Shetty has said regarding the coastal regulation zones, and also to look into the slopes and create a new rationale rather than the 200 meters at the high tide, beyond the high tide point, I think would be a very important thing to look at it. And this is one of the good inputs that has come out from both the presentation together. And of course the Shetty's own suggestion with regard to the archaeology of the tidal meter data would be a very interesting thing, but I don't know whether we can also lay access today to the global data and create a real archaeology even beyond the 100 years that we have the data in the country, and what kind of access is today available. And particularly this is also important because when we talked about the Pacific component of the tsunami and we were not able to predict whether the tsunami could have been predicted in the proper way, even using that particular data, whether the inadequacy of understanding that information, or whether the inadequacy of modeling, or whether it is inadequacy of many other factors, how much insight do we have, even as we put our own Indian Ocean system. That I think would be critical, because ultimately one has to have an interdependence between the two regions, ultimately for a global database which could be more comprehensive in predicting this, even though this could be regional but with global ramifications. The other part of it is, of course, the important complementing presentation which Mr. Dr. Radhakrishnan made as well as Dr. Hegde made. What is significant in both these presentations is it had been complementing each other, one from the ocean-based observation network and the other the space-based network. And I'm aware that the space is also planning to have an ocean observation satellite, very specifically meant for this, which will have a scatterometer and an ocean color monitor. This will be a very new dimension to the whole measurements, both the physical and the biological oceanography, which could also be used. And ultimately, of course, one thing that was not mentioned is the role of the interferometric techniques of SAR, which could provide you the height information much better than what is today possible. And probably this should be integrated into a space observation strategy where these kind of techniques are used and improvements are done. Otherwise, we just won't be able to measure the ocean surface wave, because it will be so smooth, 1 to 2 feet, that you will have hardly any information whether it is a part of a tsunami wave structure or something other. But I think probably this is an area which is worthwhile. I was really thrilled to hear Professor Setter's Silappatikaram and the whole my myths related to the tsunami. And but what is also, if you couple that with the talk by Sri Sukumar on the folklore that the Andaman Nicobar is the tribal people, I think there is a lot of sense. I think it was a very, initially I thought that it could be one of the isolated, but to keep the interest, and you need some variety when you talk of multidisciplinary approaches. But I think it is much more than just the variety of presentations. There is a sound scientific basis now, at least it looks to me, or a social basis to couple this with some of the work that one should do on the folklores or myths that these island tribes may be possessing, and which could also be useful to provide an insight in this area. I would be very, our Venkatesh Bhatt's presentation, and in fact we brought him all the way from Delhi. Currently, he is in the Delhi government, mainly to make sure that we have a very authentic information regarding the Andaman Nicobar management. In fact, I can only say that when I tried to reach him within 24 hours of the event, and I was more concerned about him and his family than anything else, because I worked so closely with him over years. And he was just not available. And I should say for 1 week he was not available, and which means that he was just he had shut off everything and he's just on the field. And later on he returned the call, I think after a week or so, saying that I understand you have been calling me for the last 7 days. And that is the first time I talked to him. But it was an incredible operation that he and his colleagues did at the Andaman Nicobar Islands. In fact, he has given me a virtual rundown of everything that happened there. It is so nice to see that the island administration rose up to the occasion and met the challenge squarely. And I should specifically pay kudos to Venkatesh Bhatt in this forum for the very excellent work that he carried out and the team that he set up to do this. Because knowing Venkatesh, he is not the kind of person who is known to be talking too much about what he did or what he did not do. But particularly what he did not do, he may say, but what he did, he doesn't say. So that's why I thought I should mention about it. But he has also brought out in his presentation some of the very insightful details in areas like health, in areas like the other coordination and so on, the vulnerability issues, I'm sure, and also the volcanic part of it. And now the volcano has become active there after you left. So, but the fact remains that this is another thing, and one has to really keep watching. Last time when we tried to go to the barren island, it was impossible to go because of the cloud cover and the difficulty to fly an helicopter. But now it is becoming slowly active, and what it means in terms of this, only Professor Gaur can tell us in the future as to whether this volcanic activity could lead to a substantial seismic activity in the region, in addition to what we have been experiencing. Sanjeev Levin's presentation was very, very interesting, very systematic. I think the whole thing is related to organization, professionalism, teamwork, coordination, and discipline that everything would one like to see. And so it's a wonderful thing. In fact, he did send me a very detailed account of the whole thing much earlier to this meeting, immediately after I think the teams returned from Andaman Nicobar, and subsequently, of course, he has also made a small presentation material here. I'm sure this is going to be a very useful basis for future too, for organizing similar efforts elsewhere and also here. And it may be useful to include this, if he doesn't object to, in some form in the proceedings that may come out on which Professor Narasimha may be talking. And I liked Rama Govindarajan's presentation. She was very practical, and I thought she has enough material to create a small manual, do's and don'ts, which could be given to any people who go there, because she had all those details there, and I am sure that that is something that we would look forward to. And animal behavior presentation by Sukumar was, it always fascinated me, these kind of news, carefully reading it and trying to understand why these things happen, whether these are the paranormal capabilities of living systems, and to what extent these paranormal capabilities can be brought to bear in trying to get the sensing capability for these kind of events. But that is something I should say at that point I should stop, and very interesting set of presentations during the last portion of the session under Dr. Arkat Ramchandran, which was very interesting. But unfortunately, I think we couldn't do enough justice in trying to discuss many of the points that would have come out of those presentations. Maybe this is never the end of the story on the matters of disaster, and I am sure that we will have more occasion to discuss both the past events and events that could be present in the future. So with this, I would like to especially express my deepest gratitude to Professor Narasimha, who really is the creator of this entire effort. He has taken very great pains into ensuring that it be a very successful set of meetings and presentations, and making sure that no detail is left out, and this is typical of what he does in anything. So I would like to thank you, Professor Narasimha, for this, and all the speakers, all the participants, and all those who have deliberated on this very important event. All I could say is that this should become a feature of the NIAS activity, where we could bring people of different disciplines and look at a problem or look at an issue like disaster in a holistic fashion, as it has been going on over the years, but we can keep adding new dimensions to this in the light of the newer experiences that we may be gaining. So with this few words, let me thank all of you once again, and we do look forward to your continuing interaction with the NIAS community in the context of this and many other activities in which you both of us may be interested. Thank you very much.
That is, I'm very thankful that I was invited. We came here at 9 o'clock in the morning, 30, and personally, I feel very enriched with all the scientific knowledge that we have received, the problems that have been talked about, and I'm most grateful to the organizers for at least enriching my knowledge and perception, and thank you very much for this.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Dr. Sengupta. Well, I'll be extremely brief because we are already past our time and it's been a long day. In the first place, I would like to say that as a follow-up on this meeting, what we would really like to do is to make a brief report. I know that some of you have left your presentations on the computer, but I would like very much that all of you who spoke here, and maybe even those who did not actually speak here, would send me or Dr. Sangeeta Menon a brief report, in particular oriented towards the action that you think should be taken. And you may have comments about this meeting as well. Professor Sengupta has been very generous in the comments he made. But it's also been pointed out that perhaps we should have had more sociologists here talking about what we should do, maybe one or two psychologists. We have tried to spread our net quite wide, but as I said early in the morning, we can never get really everybody into the meeting. But we would greatly appreciate it if every one of you, in particular all the speakers, would send us a 1 to 2 page report emphasizing the action that you think should be taken. On the basis of that, we will first of all bring out a report, but also summarize a set of actions that government and other agencies might consider. That we would like to urge them to consider. Well, Dr. Kasturirangan has given a splendid summary of what happened during the day, so I'm not going to attempt once again anything about that at all. We have heard many different aspects of the problem of the tsunami. It was a deliberate decision on our part to take a look at the situation as it was 6 months after the thing occurred. For the reasons that he mentioned, we wanted to be sure that we begin to absorb the lessons of the event, and we also wanted to make sure that people who had actually experience with handling its consequences were here with us today to share their experiences. And I think from these points of view, the meeting has been most useful. And I look forward to putting such a report together. I just want to thank all of you who've put in so much effort to make presentations here, to come to our meeting, to join it, and to make all the points that you made. I want to thank Dr. Kasturirangan, who has been pushing us to hold this meeting and has made many suggestions and has helped us to get some of the speakers here to join us at this meeting. I want to thank very much my colleague Dr. Sangeeta Menon at this institute, who has been convener for this workshop and has helped us put together this program. And she has made many contributions in drawing up the program and in making sure that everything here has been organized well and going well. And I want to thank our administration and our friends here. Somehow when they're here, all the equipment works. So, and that's very important. You see, it's part of holding a meeting very well. And Professor Rajgopal is not, I don't see him here now, and the Captain Joseph and the other people in the administration. So thank you all very much once again. As I said in the morning, this institute has now almost a tradition of looking at disaster management every year. And we've been doing that for the IAS in particular. And I think everything that's been said here today will be very useful in those courses. And we look forward to organizing such meetings. This is not the last one. Again, well before the next disaster happens, I hope, so that we are always in a better state of preparedness. I want to conclude with this note that Dr. Ramchandran mentioned. I think it's very appropriate that we should be very critical about what's going on, because that's the way that we improve. But let's also remember that in fact, in spite of all of our efforts, in spite of all the problems that we have, we actually did pretty well. I mean, this is not to say that things can't be improved. They can be improved a great deal more. But I think the whole world recognizes that India did a pretty good job. Let's do it in such a way that we're not satisfied with pretty good, but we want to do an excellent job. Thank you all very much.